When I was a kid, somewhere between the ages of 7 and 10, I started having a recurring nightmare. I can't tell you exactly when it began, only that it stayed with me for years, always returning when I least expected it. Same angle, same drawings. They just vanished. For nearly 6 months, nothing happened. I let myself relax. Same countdown clock. Not dream wrong, different. And then I noticed it. And I felt cold. The bedroom window was open, wide open. I jolted awake instantly. Same man at the window. One night, out of nowhere, the dream returned. Same structure, same setting. The same floating perspective from above my bed. But then, for whatever reason, the dreams just stopped. No warning, no final message. I began to believe that whatever it was, it had passed. My consciousness felt detached, weightless, suspended in air with no control. I was wrong. I looked around, clock ticking backwards, drawings on the wall, toy train back in a new place. I didn't sleep again that night. I couldn't. But something felt wrong. But this time, I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed, true. Terrifying sleep paralysis. My mind was screaming at me to move, to check the window, to do something, but I couldn't even twitch. My body was frozen, my muscles locked, really cold. Like a breeze was coming in through the open window. I couldn't see. I lay there, totally helpless, convinced that any second now, the man from my dream was going to crawl through, and I wouldn't be able to stop him. Those 5 minutes of paralysis were the longest of my life. I can't fully explain the kind of fear that takes hold when you're aware, terrified, and totally unable to act. Finally, I broke free. I shot up, rushed to the window, and found it closed. Locked tight, just like always. But that didn't matter. I used to have this little red toy train when I was really young, but I lost it years before these dreams ever began. The damage had already been done. Maybe once every few months. Not enough to call it frequent, but just enough to leave a shadow over my childhood. And what made it worse was how strangely vivid it always felt, like I was stuck in this half-lucid state, not quite asleep, but nowhere close to being awake. The dream always started the same way. I'd be lying in bed, but not seeing the room from my own eyes. Instead, I'd be watching myself from above, like a camera had been mounted on the ceiling, and I was viewing the scene through a black and white security feed. He never moved at first, just stood there watching me. That alone was unsettling enough. I would try to move, to drift down into my body, or at least shift position, but I couldn't do anything other than turn my head and look around. Just that my head, swiveling slowly side to side. I was aware I was dreaming, but that didn't stop the creeping dread that always came next. Once the fear settled in, I'd begin to notice oddities in my bedroom. Familiar objects would be just a little bit off. Always. Part of me needed to know, needed proof. The first thing I'd always spot was my digital clock. Instead of showing the correct time, it would be counting backward, like a silent countdown ticking away to something I couldn't see. Locked. No signs of anyone. Not really. The dream felt too specific, too detailed to be random. No handprints, no marks, no footprints outside. That's when the unease would deepen. My eyes would start picking up more strange details. Nothing. No signs of anyone ever being there. Taped across my walls and furniture were crayon drawings. Messy, childish ones that looked exactly like something a kid my age might make. Only I didn't remember ever drawing them, and I was never the kind of kid who liked to draw in the first place. Each drawing showed the same eerie scene. A group of people holding hands, all with forced, wide smiles on their faces. In the middle of the group was a smaller figure. I always assumed it was supposed to be me. They were all standing in front of a house with a blue roof. I never could remember much more than that, no matter how hard I tried to recall it after waking up. And then there was the toy train. Yet, in every version of the dream, it would reappear, always in a different spot. Sometimes near the closet, sometimes halfway under the bed, once even perched on top of my dresser. I don't know why, but that detail always stuck with me. It was like the dream was reaching into my past and pulling out things I had long forgotten. After taking in all these strange sights, a sort of pressure would build inside me, a compulsion I couldn't fight. I would turn my head to look at the window, and just like that, he'd be there. A man standing right outside, inches from the glass. He had short, graying hair and a thin, jagged scar or cut on the left side of his forehead. That's all I could ever really make out. His features blurred around the edges, like he existed slightly out of focus. But I always remembered that scar. After a few seconds, his hands would slowly rise, and he'd begin clawing at the window fingernails, scraping down the glass, as though he was trying to open it with nothing but his fingers. That's usually the point where I'd wake up. Some nights I'd shoot out of bed and rush to the window. Other times I'd be frozen in place, too shaken to move. But I always checked. And every time, the window was shut. Just my quiet room and the cool silence of night. After the fourth time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom tried to reassure me that kids often had recurring dreams. My dad added that they were just one room away, that I could always wake them if I needed. I said I understood, but I didn't. My dad must have sensed I wasn't totally comforted, because later that evening, he took me outside to check the perimeter of the house with him. Flashlight in hand, we circled the entire exterior. But still, the fear didn't leave me. That year, I had the dream maybe 3 or 4 more times. Each time was identical. After that night, something in me changed. I realized the dream wasn't just some random bad memory playing on a loop. It was starting to evolve, starting to feel like something was responding to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that some part of it was coming from outside, not just inside my head. So I came up with a plan. Every night before I fell asleep, I'd focus on the dream, think through every detail I could remember. My logic was simple. If I kept it fresh in my mind, maybe it wouldn't catch me off guard. Maybe I'd feel less afraid. Oddly enough, it worked. The next time it happened, I wasn't frozen in terror. I saw the same reversed clock, the same strange drawings, the man at the window, but this time, I stayed calm. I didn't even get out of bed afterward. Over time, the dream became less of a nightmare and more like some old recurring memory that wouldn't let go. But even when the fear faded, something about it lingered like an aftertaste in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite describe. That lingering feeling eventually pushed me to bring it up again with my parents. This time, I went into full detail, the floating perspective, the drawings, the train, and especially the man outside the window. I told them about the scar on his forehead. That was the moment things changed. My dad cut me off and asked if I was absolutely sure about the scar. I said yes, and immediately saw him glance at my mom. Something passed between them, something unspoken but obvious. When I asked what was going on, they told me not to worry, but I could feel the tension. A few days later, they sat me down and gave me a bit more of the story. When I was a toddler, too young to remember, there was a man named Brian who used to be around a lot. He wasn't family, just a close friend of my dad's. They called him Uncle Brian. He used to watch me, babysit me when both of my parents were working. Apparently, I loved him. I'd cry when he left, begged him to stay, wanted him to read me to sleep. But something happened. My dad didn't go into detail. He just said there was a serious falling out, and that he told Brian to stay away from us, especially from me. The part that really made my skin crawl was when they said Brian had a scar on his forehead from a car accident that happened before I was even born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't need to. I knew. That night, my dad lingered in the living room with me after my mom went to bed. He said he had a theory that maybe my brain had held on to something from when I was really little, even if I couldn't consciously remember it. He believed the dreams were my mind's way of processing those early memories. The scar, the sense of being watched, the man at the window, it was all too specific to be random. I had no memory of Brian, not even a blurry one, but it didn't matter. The idea that something could stay buried like that, hidden until my brain decided to replay it over and over, it stuck with me. Months went by, and the dreams became less frequent. I only had it once or twice over the next year. And then, sometime in the 4th year, everything changed again. I woke up from one of the dreams like usual, groggy and disoriented, and looked over at the window, just instinct at that point, and I saw something move. Just a flicker, a shift in the shadows, but I was sure. Every bit of numbness I had built over the years shattered in an instant. I screamed for my parents. My dad ran outside barefoot. My mom grabbed me and held me tight. A few minutes later, my dad came back, whispered something to her, and told me to stay in their room while they called the police. I stayed put, but I never heard sirens, never heard voices. The next morning, my dad told me he'd found faint footprints right outside my window. Not fresh, but definitely there. When I asked if he thought it was Brian, he said no, that it was impossible. We'd moved. Brian didn't know where we lived, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right. He told me nothing bad was going to happen, and in a way, he was right. Because after that night, the dream never came back. Even though the dream never came back after that night, something inside me didn't fully settle. I stopped bringing it up to my parents because every time I did, I could sense they didn't want to talk about it anymore. They'd either brush it off or change the subject entirely, so I let it go, at least on the surface. But what truly haunted me wasn't just the memory of the dream, or the scar, or even the footprints outside my window. It was the sickening idea that every single time ID had that dream, there may have actually been someone standing outside, watching me. That thought kept me awake some nights far more than the dream ever did. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe ID heard something while asleep, like a sound from outside that triggered my brain into creating the dream. Or maybe it was something deeper, a subconscious imprint from my early childhood that I never fully understood. Still, it stayed with me. Years passed, and I thought I had put it all behind me. I developed new habits to keep nightmares away, like falling asleep to background sounds, chess videos, rainstorms, podcasts about space. Anything to anchor my mind and keep the darkness at bay. It worked surprisingly well. But one weekend, everything shifted again. I was staying over at my friend Duncan's place with our buddy Ian. His parents were out of town, and we set up for a typical sleepover: blankets, snacks, movies in the living room. When we finally crashed, I didn't have my usual audio comforts, and that meant my dreams were up for grabs. That night, I had one of the strangest and most vivid dreams of my life. I was alone on a small sailboat in the middle of a choppy sea, the sky a swirling mix of deep purple and stormy gray, the wind howling in my ears. I'd never been on a sailboat before, yet everything felt so real. Suddenly, the boat jolted hard like it had hit something, and a hole opened underneath me. Water started gushing in. I panicked, trying to block the leak with my jacket, useless of course. And just when I thought I was going to sink, a dolphin leapt from the water, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Wake up." I shot awake immediately. At first, I chalked it up to a weird dream, but something felt wrong. I looked around the room. Everything looked normal. Duncan and Ian were both asleep, but then I heard it. A steady rushing sound from upstairs. Not a drip, not something muffled. It sounded like a faucet turned on full blast. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the sound wouldn't stop. So I got up to investigate. As I walked upstairs, the sound grew louder, leading me to the bathroom at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open, and through the gap, I saw water pouring out of the sink. One of the knobs had been turned all the way on, but no one was in sight. I stood in the hallway frozen, gut twisted with dread. Something in me screamed not to go in. Too many blind spots in that bathroom. The tub curtain, the corners, anywhere someone could hide. I backed up and ran back downstairs to wake Duncan. I couldn't move. The urgency in my voice snapped him awake, and we went upstairs together. The moment he stepped into the bathroom, a man leapt out from behind the tub and tackled him. It happened in an instant. The guy was swinging a PVC pipe like he meant to do real harm. I just jumped in, trying to pull him off Duncan, but none of it made sense. I didn't think. The fight was chaotic, wild. Ian ran up to help, but the man managed to break free and run out the front door before we could stop him. The police arrived about 30 minutes later. They said it was a random break-in. The guy had entered through an unlocked window downstairs. Why turn the faucet on? It wasn't a burglary. It was a trap. Why wait in the bathroom? Duncan was convinced the intruder knew his parents were gone and thought he'd be alone. If that's true, and if I hadn't woken up from that bizarre dolphin dream, I don't know what would have happened. We thought that was the end of it. But a few months later, something even stranger occurred. I was spending the weekend at my girlfriend Bonnie's house, one that made all the others feel tame in comparison. Her parents were out celebrating their anniversary, so I stayed over. Her room was on the second floor, facing a dark line of trees at the back of their property. At night, the view outside her window turned into a black void. We spent the evening watching a movie, then drifted off to sleep in her room. And that's when it happened, another dream.